All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. It is Sunday, September 19th, 2021, and we're live. So I wanted to come on and give a brief preview of a 10-week online course that I teach called From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. This class normally meets on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But we're going to have class today, a little after 12 noon. So you can still register for the 10-week online course. And we go through and look at history from basically the last year of the Civil War, 1865, through about 1968. We deal with the Civil War, Jim Crow era, Reconstruction, World War I, World War II, Civil Rights Movement, Black Power Movement. We had a great class number one last weekend. So I wanted to give a brief recap of some of the things we talked about in class number one. And we dealt with what led to the Civil War taking place, what led to the Civil War taking place. Okay, and we know the Civil War was 1861 to 1865. It leads to the 13th Amendment, ratification of the 13th Amendment, December 6, 1865. It leads to 3.9 million enslaved Africans being freed also. So I do a PowerPoint presentation in the class. We have book references, articles, video clips, a ton of information. You can still register for the course. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And when you scroll down the page, we have the information right on the home page of our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Class is regularly $130, on sale $70. Okay, as soon as you click on register here and enroll, you can start watching the content. You can watch class number one. All right, so very briefly here, when we look at what led to the Civil War taking place, okay, some of the things that led to it taking place, and let's just do a quick recap here. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint presentation because I use a PowerPoint presentation in the class as well. So if we look at the U.S. Civil War, the Civil War in the United States began in 1861 after decades of simmering tensions between northern and southern states over slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. Slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. So, and I went through and dealt with some history in class number one. I went through and dealt with some history leading up to 1861. Okay, and I'm going to go through some of those events that took place leading up to the Civil Rights Movement in just a minute here. So, the election of President Abraham Lincoln, who became president-elect in November of 1860, caused 7 southern states to secede from the Union and form what's known as the Confederate States of America, the CSA, the Confederate States of America. 4 more states are going to join them in 1861. 4 more states are going to join them. The first state to secede from the Union was South Carolina, December 20th, 1860. About 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln became president-elect in November of 1860. And he's president-elect of the Republican candidate for the presidency. And the Republican Party was formed 6 years before that, in 1854, by groups of abolitionists. And many of these southern states fear that Lincoln is going to free the slaves. Okay, so South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, December 20th, 1860. Now, the war between the states, as the Civil War was also known, ended in Confederate surrender April 9th, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee surrenders to General Ulysses S. Grant. We know Ulysses S. Grant is going to later become President Ulysses S. Grant. Now, the conflict, the Civil War, was the costliest and deadliest war ever fought on American soil, with some 620,000 of the 2.4 million soldiers killed. 620,000 soldiers approximately were killed, millions more injured, and much of the South was left in ruin. So if we look at some of the things that led to the Civil War being fought. Okay, so we went back and we started with the Louisiana Purchase, and these are some of the things we talked about in class number one. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the territory of the U.S. The U.S. gets 828,000 square miles of land from France. Napoleon Bonaparte and France were fighting against the Haitians during the Haitian Revolution. So this land that the U.S. gets doubles the territory. It gives new land, new territory to plant crops and to have slaves on. Okay. Now, even though they tried to keep a balance between slaveholding states and free states, this still gave new land to the U.S. So this increased the need for enslaved Africans also. So we have the Louisiana Purchase, and they buy this land for about $15 million from France. You have the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. 1845, Texas becomes a state in the Union. It comes into the Union as a slaveholding state. Abolitionists are against this also. And we know Texas won its independence from Mexico in 1836. So then you have what's known as Manifest Destiny. And Manifest Destiny is this ideology that Europeans in the U.S. were they operating based upon providence from God, which gave them the right to expand capitalism, expand democracy, and they want to, the U.S., these Europeans in the U.S. want to take over the entire North American continent. So you have the Mexican-American War, which is basically a territorial dispute, U.S. expansion, and the Mexican-American War ends with what's known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in this treaty, the U.S. is going to get from Mexico the land, the territory that makes up what today we know as California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada. All that territory was Mexico. That was all part of Mexico. Mexico loses 1/3 of their land because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is what ends the Mexican-American War. The U.S. is going to pay about $15 million for this land as well. The U.S. pays about $15 million for this land. Mexico loses about 1/3 of their territory. Okay. Now, this is then going to lead to figuring out, okay, which territories are going to have slavery, which are not. So this leads to the compromise of 1850. And the Compromise of 1850, how many people are familiar with the Compromise of 1850? The Compromise of 1850 consisted of 5 bills. And some of these bills are dealing with determining in these different territories which ones will have slaves, etc. We know California comes into the Union as a free state, okay? But one of those bills in the Compromise of 1850 is the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 is going to intensify the abolitionist movement and make it more dangerous for runaway slaves who are in the North, because now with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, they can the sheriffs there in northern states can deputize white people to help hunt down runaway African slaves, deny them a court trial, and just turn them back over to their owners in the South. Okay, this is the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And what this does is this increases the number of runaway African slaves who go into Canada. All right. So this is going to be a result of the Mexican-American War and the ending of the Mexican-American War. So you have the Compromise of 1850, and then you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So Kansas and Nebraska become territories of the U.S. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 is leaving it up to the people who live in these territories to determine whether or not they want to have slavery, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the United States, by the government, by the federal government. So this infuriates a lot of abolitionists as well. So you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. As a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, you have the formation of the Republican Party in 1854. And the Republican Party is formed by groups of abolitionists who are the counter to, at the time, largely the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party, they want to end slavery. So you have the formation of the Republican Party of 1854 as a backlash to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. And then you also have what's known as Bleeding Kansas, okay? Bleeding Kansas. And Bleeding Kansas is armed conflict from about 1855 to 1859. Armed conflict in the Kansas territory between pro-slavery groups and anti-slavery groups, abolitionists. And they're having armed conflict. There's going to be about 55 people who are going to be killed in this armed conflict in what's known as Bleeding Kansas. So these are some of the things we talked about in class number 1. All right. And then let's look at this here. I'm going to go through, and we have talked about, we'll talk about the Reconstruction Era as well. Okay. Reconstruction is going to be the period of time 1865 to 1877. And during this period of time, so this is after basically chattel slavery ends for all practical purposes. For a 14-year period, the U.S. government took steps to try and integrate the nation's newly freed Black population into society. Between 1863 and 1877, the U.S. government undertook the task of integrating nearly 4 million formerly enslaved people into society, and the Civil War bitterly divided the country over the issue of slavery. A white slave-holding South that built its economy and culture on slave labor was now forced by its defeat in a war that claimed 620,000 lives to change its economic, political, and social relations with African Americans. Okay, so the Reconstruction Era, we're going to see these advancements made in African Americans acquiring land, buying land. Some are going to get land through the Black Freeman Indian treaties of 1866, and then through the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887. We talk about all this in the class. But you're going to have about 2,000 African Americans who are elected to public office. We have the 15th Amendment of 1870. But then also what we're going to see during this period of time, and then even after this, we're going to see large labor unions founded, like the National Labor Union. And these labor unions are largely going to be founded to protect jobs for white men and lock African Americans out of these jobs that we have been doing for free from largely 1619 to 1865, because there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And these are going to, we dominated the skilled trades, okay? And these are going to be a lot of the skill sets that help to build this country. Well, after slavery ends, now we can compete for wages, okay? We're getting locked out of a lot of these jobs, and white immigrants who are here and others that are coming, a lot of them are going to get the jobs that we should have got, okay? So let me go back to this here. So we also deal with Special Field Order number 15, 40 acres in the Mule, and break down what that was. And then we deal with Juneteenth, General Order number 3, June 19th, 1865. General William Tecumseh Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15, which redistributed roughly 40,000 confiscated acres of land in Low Country, Georgia, and South Carolina, and 40-acre plots to newly freed Black families. When the Freemans Bureau, which was in Freemans Bureau, is created in starts in 1865. Freemans Bureau by act of Congress, the Freemans Bureau. When the Freemans Bureau was established in March 1865, created partly to redistribute confiscated land from Southern whites, it gave legal title for 40-acre plots to African Americans and white Southern Unions. And most of this land is going to be taken back by President Andrew Johnson, who succeeds Lincoln after Lincoln is assassinated. Johnson is sympathetic to the Confederacy and sympathetic to the Southerners, the white Southerners, former plantation owners. But this was land it was coastal land in South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. It wasn't land in all of the South. It was coastal land in South Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. And when you study, we go through study what Special Field Order number 15 was, 40 acres in the Mule. And the Mule comes later, and the Mule was to be loaned to us, not given to us. It was to be loaned to us for a certain period of time. The land that we were given was supposed to be only African Americans were supposed to live in those areas, and we were supposed to govern ourselves. So it was supposed to be like a nation within a nation. After the war was over, President Andrew Johnson returned most of the land to the former white slave owners. At its peak during Reconstruction, the Freemans Bureau had 900 agents scattered across 11 southern states, handling everything from labor disputes to distributing clothing and food to starting schools to protecting freedmen from the Ku Klux Klan. And what we're going to see is that we're going to see the Freedmen's Bank also, and then we're going to see the Freedmen's Bank collapse in 1874. There was poor management. That Frederick Douglass is eventually put in charge of the Freedmen's Bank. He invests thousands of dollars into the Freedmen's Bank to prop it up. The Freedmen's Bank is going to collapse. There's about $2.9 million of our deposits in the Freedmen's Bank that we lost. So and then when we look at the Freedmen's Bureau, it was underfunded. The Freedmen's Bureau originally was supposed to only last for a year. It gets extensions, but it should have lasted longer than that. We were enslaved for 246 years. Okay. It only lasts from 1865. It only lasts maybe about 9 or 10 years, something like that. It should have lasted much longer than that. And we still have never recovered from the Freedmen's Bank collapsing, and I would say the closing of the Freedmen's Bureau as well. Okay, so we deal with Journal number 3, June 19th, 1865, and Juneteenth, what it was and what it's not, and correcting the history about Juneteenth also. We go through, look at the 13th Amendment of 1865 and dispel that myth that there's a loophole in the 13th Amendment. No, there's not. I did a 2-hour interview with Dr. Daryl Scott, history professor at Howard University. We went through and dispelled this myth about the 13th Amendment re-enslaving African Americans and things like this loophole. The 13th Amendment is based upon the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Okay, this law already applied to white men, and they're given the same rights to African Americans. Okay, what they're doing is giving the same rights to African Americans that white people had. All right, this law already applied to white people, so it wasn't something new that was created for us. That's just nonsense. This whole myth that the 13th Amendment re-enslaved African Americans and had a loophole. Dr. Daryl Scott traced this back to a prisoner in California named Lynn Wood in the 1960s, who it looks like was the first one who came up with this. Because when you go uh, you read about abolitionists and things like this, and you read during the Reconstruction era, that's not something that we're saying, oh, the 13th Amendment re-enslaved us. No, that's something from the that's something from the 1960s. Okay, there was a, let me see if I can pull up this article here so you can read this. Okay, how's everybody doing today? How you all like this type of information? So there was this article here from historynewsnetwork.org, and they interviewed Dr. Daryl Scott about this. Some of you all have seen the interview I've done with them. We also talked about the 1619 project as well, and Nicole Hannah Jones. Let's look at this here. Read this article from historynewsnetwork.org. Daryl Michael Scott, Daryl with one R. Bad history and worse social science have replaced truth. Bad history and worse social science have replaced truth. Now, Dr. Daryl Scott teaches a history class at Howard University called From Slavery to Mass Incarceration, from slavery to mass incarceration. And one of the things he does is it goes through and dispels a lot of these myths. Lee Wood, that's his name, Lee Wood. Dispels a lot of these myths that students come into classes with. And he deals with Lee Wood, who was a prisoner in California in the 1960s. Okay, he said, when I started going back and searching, I learned about Lee Wood, the guy who was in prison in California, and he said he discovered this. He had an epiphany when he read the 13th Amendment among a group of prisoners. So he thought that that's why he was in prison, because of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. No. Go read this full article here. Okay. All right. Let's see here. So we go through, we look at the 13th, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. We look at the force acts, like the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, the 1871. And we look at it, we use a timeline of history. And we go through and look at history chronologically. Each class we go through and analyze an approximately 10-year period of history. Okay, an approximately 10-year period of history. And to understand what happened to us after slavery ended, and how we got to where we are today, and what were the laws and policies put in place to put us in the predicament we're in today, so we understand where we need to go from here. Okay. All right. So we have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register there. Click on register here. It takes you to the next page. Click on enroll. We'll post a link here also. Class is discounted right now. It's on sale for a limited time only for $70. We do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch the full course anytime. And even after the 10-week online course is over with, you still have access to it. You can go watch the full course, okay? And then click on enroll on the next page. As soon as you enroll, you can watch class number 1. You can join us in class today. Also, you can, there's some bonus content you can watch, and there are 6 bonus lectures from me as well that you'll get also dealing with history. All right. So we take you through we look at what leads to the Civil War taking place. We look at the Reconstruction Era, 1865 to 1877. We look at the Black Power movement. We look at the Jim Crow era, and after Reconstruction ends. Okay, if we go back to this here, after Reconstruction ends, we're going to see the implementation. We see an increase in domestic terrorism against African Americans, but we also see a suppression of the African American vote, and we're going to see the southern states write these voter restriction laws into their state constitutions. 1889, Florida has the first poll tax in the country. 1889. 1890, we see the Mississippi State Convention. They're going to have the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890, and they're going to institute poll taxes and literacy tests. Okay, coming out of which was voted on at the Mississippi State Constitution, Mississippi State Convention, and this was designed to suppress the African American vote, reduce the number of African Americans who were voting, and these southern states are taking back over their state legislatures. Okay, there you have it was known as the Mississippi Plan. It was known as the Mississippi Plan, and it becomes the model for other southern states to do the same thing. All right, and they said that we are here to exclude the Negro at the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. It was presided over by a white county judge named Solomon Saladin Calhoun. Okay, and he said, let's to put the voting issue bluntly and explain why they were there. He said, let's tell the truth. If it bursts the bottom of the universe, he said, we came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer. Because this was at a time when African Americans were the majority of the population in Mississippi. So these white supremacists are trying to take back control of the state legislatures, take back control of the government in the state of Mississippi to fully impose white supremacy. So South Carolina is going to do the same thing in 1895 with their state constitution, Louisiana 1898, Alabama 1901. And they're imposing poll taxes, literacy tests, in some cases, property, in some cases, stipulating that you have to own property to be able to vote, etc., to lock African Americans out of voting. Okay, so read this article here from the Washington Post from May 1st, 2021. The Mississippi Plan to Keep Blacks from Voting in 1890. We came here to exclude the Negro. All right, so these are just some of the things that we deal with in the course. You can join us today for class number 2. And we posted the link here. You can register for the class. And it's also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on, and when you scroll down the page, you'll see the information for our radio show. I'm on 6 days a week, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to midnight, and Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My guest for today's show will be Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small. We'll talk about the documentary Hapi, because there's a screening of the documentary Hapi September 26, 3 p.m. at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. So I'll be moderating a panel discussion Sunday, September 26. Professor James Small and Dr. Leonard Jeffries are in the film. So they're going to be my guests tonight. We'll talk about the film and promote the screening of it September 26th at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. But we have the information here for the online course. Click on register here and you can join us in class today. All right, we have to get out of here. Remember, the African History Network will focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever.